The woman he can't touch is being destroyed by his own rules. But she doesn't know the contract forbidding workplace relationships was written in his father's blood after a scandal shattered their empire. The compliance clause she's accused of violating was designed to prevent him from becoming the man his father died as, or that the billionaire CEO standing silent during her interrogation has been breaking his own code since the night she walked into his gala and made distance feel like cowardice instead of protection. When Gabriel Kane watched Karen Marquez defend herself with evidence and integrity while his board demanded her termination, he had no idea his father's last words before jumping from the office window. Son, love isn't worth losing everything, would transform his 10-year commitment to emotionless leadership into the most public violation of corporate law he could commit, because falling for the junior analyst who'd been framed for espionage by his own deputy meant choosing between the contract that had kept him powerful and alone and the woman who'd already proven his father had been wrong about everything. But when his deputy leaks fabricated evidence, when paparazzi capture them in rain-soaked confrontation, when Gabriel realizes the only way to save Karen is to sacrifice himself in a boardroom confession that mirrors his father's downfall, he discovers that his greatest fear isn't repeating his father's mistakes, it's that he spent a decade building an empire to prove love was weakness. And now the choice between Karen's freedom and his carefully controlled reputation isn't his anymore, because she just walked into the boardroom with the evidence that will expose the real traitor and force Gabriel to admit he's been protecting her all along. Hello, my dearest family. You're my reason to smile, my joy every day. I love you endlessly. May heaven fill your heart with peace and your life with blessings. May each day bring love, strength, and grace your way. You are loved, cherished, and never forgotten. Thank you for your amazing support. We are one strong family. Comment where you're watching from, and let's hit 1,000 likes. The story begins. The ballroom smelled like champagne and consequence. Gabriel Kane had perfected the art of presence without participation. Standing at the center of Kane International's annual gala, tuxedo immaculate, smile practiced, eyes cataloging every investor, every board member, every person who expected the billionaire, who'd rebuilt his father's fallen empire to remain exactly as controlled as the contracts he'd written. He'd arrived early, too early, for the speeches and performances, the networking that felt more like theater than business. He cared about appearances, control, making sure the company his father had nearly destroyed with scandal stayed pristine, even if no one knew how much of that precision cost him. He was moving toward the donor reception when he noticed her. Karen Marquez, the new junior analyst from marketing, wasn't supposed to be at this event. Last-minute substitute for a colleague, according to the update his assistant had sent. She stood near the string quartet, dressed in something simple that somehow caught every light in the room. Not performing beauty, but accidentally achieving it through the particular grace of someone too focused on listening to worry about being seen. Gabriel should have looked away, should have returned to the reception, to the carefully choreographed conversations where nothing real ever happened. But something in the way she held herself, present but not performing, observing but not judging, made him pause. An aide materialized at his elbow with the efficiency of someone paid to prevent problems. Sir, that's the new hire from R&D division. Marketing analyst, Ms. Karen Marquez. A careful pause. You should probably remind her about the conduct clause. New employees sometimes don't realize the gala has the same professional boundaries as the office. Gabriel didn't respond. He just watched Karen laugh softly at something another employee said, completely unaware that she'd already crossed an invisible line simply by being noticed, by being memorable, by making him want to cross the room and introduce himself like a person instead of a policy. The evening moved with the inevitability of expensive events, speeches that praised innovation while avoiding risk, performances that entertained without challenging, conversations that networked without connecting. Gabriel performed his role flawlessly, gracious to donors, strategic with competitors, distant enough that no one mistook professionalism for friendship. But he kept finding her in the crowd, kept noticing the way she listened more than she spoke, the way her presence felt like the opposite of performance. Near midnight, a senior VP's pitch to a crucial investor began collapsing in real time, promising returns the data couldn't support, overstating capabilities everyone in the room knew were fictional. Gabriel watched the investor's expression shift from interested to skeptical to done, preparing to intervene before Kane International lost a $12 million commitment. Before he could move, Karen appeared beside him with a cocktail napkin and a pen. She wrote 3 lines: concise, brilliant, true, reframing the pitch around consumer trust data instead of projected growth, turning fiction into fact, salvaging the conversation with the kind of insight that took most analysts years to develop. Their fingertips nearly touched when he took the napkin. The moment stretched longer than physics allowed. Her eyes meeting his was something that looked like understanding. His hand holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than it should, both of them suspended in the space between professional distance and something dangerously close to recognition. He stepped to the investor, delivered Karen's reframe with the authority that came from a decade of never being questioned. Watch the conversation warm. Watch the commitment survive. When he turned back, she was already moving toward the exit, not waiting for acknowledgement, not performing modesty, just someone who'd done what needed doing and understood that staying would complicate it. The fire alarm triggered at 1 a.m., false alarm they'd discover later, caused by faulty wiring that had nothing to do with actual danger and everything to do with the building's age. Guests dispersed with the particular annoyance of wealthy people interrupted mid-networking. Staff flooded the corridors, directing evacuation with practiced efficiency. In the chaos, Gabriel found himself in a quiet hallway with Karen, both of them pressed against marble walls as crowds moved past, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something that wasn't expensive but somehow felt more honest than anything else in the building. "Thank you," he said, because the moment required acknowledgement. "For the investor pitch. That was the truth, just rearranged," she finished. "I didn't do anything except point out what the data already said. Most people don't see it that clearly. Most people are trying to be seen instead of looking." She paused. "You do that a lot, don't you? Watch instead of perform?" The observation landed like exposure. Gabriel hadn't been seen, really seen, not assessed or networked with or strategically engaged, in longer than he could remember. The honesty of it felt dangerous. "I should," he started, "get back to the reception." "I know." Karen smiled, something small and shot in knowing. "Thank you for not firing me on the spot for the conduct violation." "I didn't realize the gala counted as office space." "It doesn't." The words came out before he'd approved them. "You didn't violate anything." "Your aide seemed to think otherwise." "My aide doesn't write policy. I do." Gabriel straightened, rebuilding the distance that had collapsed in the last 3 minutes. "But maybe staying separate is still wise." "Because of the contract." Not a question, a statement that carried weight he hadn't expected her to understand yet. "Yes. The one that forbids workplace relationships, among other things." Karen looked at him with eyes that seemed to calculate something he couldn't decode. "That's a very specific rule, Mr. Kane. Most companies have friendlier language." "Most companies haven't." He stopped, restarted. "Most companies don't need the specificity." She nodded once, understanding blooming across her expression. Not pity, just recognition that some rules were written in scar tissue instead of legal precedent. "Well, thank you for the evening. And for not enforcing a policy that doesn't apply." She moved past him as staff flooded back in, emergency declared over, guests returning to conversations they'd abandoned. Gabriel stood in the corridor longer than necessary, feeling the space where she'd been like an absence. He pulled out his phone, found the company-wide policy document, scrolled to Section 7, Employee Conduct and Romantic Relationships. All Kane International employees, regardless of position, are strictly prohibited from engaging in romantic or physical relationships with direct supervisors, management, or C-suite executives. Violations will result in immediate termination and forfeiture of benefits. No exceptions. He'd written it himself 10 years ago, 3 months after his father's funeral. When the scandal was still headline news and the company was hemorrhaging, clients and board members were demanding accountability. When protection had felt more important than connection, when distance had seemed like the only way to survive, becoming the man his father had died, proving you shouldn't be. Gabriel looked up. Across the ballroom, visible through the glass walls, Karen was leaving, walking toward the exit with her coat over one arm, not looking back, completely unaware that she'd just become the first person in a decade to make him question whether the rules he'd built to protect his empire were actually protecting him from living. The closing image stayed with him as he returned to empty conversations and strategic networking. The conduct clause projected on the lobby screen like a commandment as they had walked in opposite directions earlier, both looking back once, both pretending they hadn't. By the time Gabriel left the gala at 3 a.m., driving through empty streets toward a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, he knew two things with terrifying certainty. Karen Marquez was dangerous to the peace he'd spent 10 years constructing, and he was already thinking about ways to break the rule he'd written in his father's blood. The email arrived at 8 a.m. with the bureaucratic violence of corporate discipline. Urgent, conduct policy violation, report to executive floor immediately. Karen read it twice in her cubicle, coffee going cold in her hands, trying to decode which moment from the gala had been weaponized into a termination offense. The conversation in the hallway? The napkin she'd passed Gabriel's during the investor pitch? The simple fact that she'd been memorable in a company that rewarded invisibility? Her desk phone rang. Executive assistant, voice professionally neutral. Ms. Marquez, Mr. Kane will see you now. 42nd floor. The elevator ride up felt like ascending toward verdict. Karen kept her spine straight, hands steady, practicing the composure her mother had taught her. When they were looking for weakness, give them marble. She'd been fired before. Once for asking questions about accounting discrepancies that turned out to be fraud. Once for refusing advances from a supervisor who'd called it career development. And she'd survived with references and integrity intact. This would be the same, except it wasn't. Gabriel's office occupied the northeast corner, glass walls overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, air that smelled like expensive coffee and colder decisions. He stood at the window when she entered, suit immaculate, posture rigid, looking less like a man about to fire someone and more like someone bracing for impact. Sit, he said without turning. Karen remained standing. If you're terminating me, I prefer to receive it standing, Mr. Kane. That made him turn. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not sympathetic, just carefully blank in a way that suggested effort. I'm not terminating you. I'm issuing a warning. For what specifically? For attending an event you were invited to, speaking to colleagues in a professional capacity, and providing valuable insight that saved a major investment. He paused. According to compliance, that constitutes inappropriate proximity to senior leadership. The absurdity of it landed between them like a challenge neither could acknowledge. Your aide said the gala counted as office space, Karen said carefully. I was told I violated policy simply by being noticed. My aide doesn't write policy, I do. Gabriel moved to his desk, pulled up a document on his monitor. The conduct clause prohibits romantic or physical relationships. It does not prohibit competence, or conversation, or existing in the same room as me without prior written permission. Then why am I here? Because you're too bright to make small mistakes. His voice was cold, professional, and someone wants you to look like you're making them. Karen met his eyes. Then maybe the mistake wasn't mine. The words hung there, an accusation wrapped in observation, a hairline crack forming in the discipline both of them had been maintaining since the gala. Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that said she'd landed somewhere true. Consider yourself warned, he said finally. Don't give anyone ammunition. And Marquez? He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd entered. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Just quieter. She left his office feeling less like she'd been reprimanded and more like she'd been recruited for a war she didn't fully understand yet. Karen's first week became a masterclass in strategic invisibility. She arrived early, left late, contributed brilliantly in meetings while directing credit elsewhere. When the Lux skincare account, a $1 million client threatening to walk due to brand fatigue, landed on her desk marked urgent, save or release, she didn't panic. She built a consumer empathy map, not the usual demographic data or purchase patterns, but emotional architecture. What customers felt when they saw the product, what fears drove their buying decisions, what stories they told themselves about aging and worth, and the impossible math of staying visible in a culture that erased women after 40. She pitched it at 4 p.m. on Thursday. The Lux executives cried, actually cried, signed a 3-year renewal before the presentation ended. By Friday, her Slack was lighting up with quiet respect from colleagues who'd been corporate ghosts until her work made them visible. Karen didn't celebrate, just filed the win, updated her portfolio, and stayed late finishing the next impossible project, which is how she found herself in the boardroom at 11 p.m. when the power flickered. Emergency lights bathed the space in amber, that particular color that makes everything feel suspended between day and night, reality and dream. Karen had been collecting her materials when she noticed him. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened in a way that made him look less like a CEO and more like someone who'd forgotten to stop being human. He was reading her empathy map presentation, pen in hand, making notes in margins that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. He looked up when she froze in the doorway. Neither spoke for 3 seconds that felt like exposure. I was just, Karen started. Leaving, I know. Gabriel set down the pen. You should, it's late. But neither moved. The amber light made honesty easier, made distance feel optional instead of mandatory. Your presentation saved more than an account, he said quietly. It reminded the room that consumers are people. That seems obvious, but it's the first thing companies forget when profit becomes the only language. My mother taught me that. She worked retail for 30 years, noticed at everything, forgotten by everyone. Karen moved closer without deciding to. She lost her job because a rumor said she was stealing. No proof, just someone's word against hers. By the time the truth came out, she'd already been blacklisted. Gabriel's expression shifted, something raw flickering beneath the control. My father had a similar experience, except his rumor was an affair with a junior executive. By the time he proved it was fabricated, the board had already voted him out. He jumped from this building 3 months later. He paused. Reputation breaks people faster than truth ever repairs them. The confession hung between them like shared scar tissue. Karen understood suddenly why the conduct clause existed, why Gabriel moved through the world like someone expecting landmines, why distance felt safer than risk. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, just... He stopped, restarted. Just stay careful. People here watch for weakness, and proximity to me makes you visible in ways that aren't safe. The electricity surged back without warning, fluorescence blazing, boardroom returning to its sterile corporate brightness. In the sudden light, Karen realized they were standing closer than professional distance allowed, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into Gabriel's face, the particular loneliness that comes from being powerful and untouchable. They both stepped back simultaneously, smiling with the wounded recognition of two people who'd just admitted more than they'd planned. Good night, Mr. Kane, Karen said. Gabriel, he corrected quietly. When it's just us, you can... He stopped. Good night, Mr. Marquez. She left with her materials and a warmth in her chest that felt dangerous. In the security office 3 floors down, a red LED blinked on a monitor showing the boardroom's north camera. Someone watched the footage rewind and replay. Watching the moment, Karen and Gabriel stood too close, watching their smiles, watching evidence accumulate frame by careful frame. The watcher smiled, made a note, and saved the file under a folder labeled Leverage. The anonymous tip arrived at compliance on Monday morning with the clinical efficiency of someone who understood exactly how corporate investigations worked. Employee E. Marquez accessed restricted R&D prototypes outside approved hours. Recommend immediate review. HR opened a silent investigation, the kind that happened in locked conference rooms with IT forensics and legal observers. The kind employees never knew about until security was escorting them from the building. By Tuesday afternoon, Karen's login credentials had been tagged elevated risk, her network activity flagged for continuous monitoring, her digital footprint analyzed with a particular scrutiny reserved for potential thieves. Gabriel learned about the probe during a routine executive briefing. 3 bullet points buried in a security update, Karen's name appearing like a punch to the chest he couldn't react to. He kept his face marble, asked clinical questions about investigation protocols, dismissed the room with the controlled precision of someone who understood that emotion was evidence. Then he called the chief of compliance from his private line. The Marquez investigation, Gabriel said without preamble. I want it conducted with absolute rigor, no assumptions, no shortcuts, evidence only. Of course, Mr. Kane, though I should mention her access patterns are concerning. Late-night logins, prototype files opened outside project scope, then document everything and prove intent. But if this is circumstantial, if someone's using access logs to manufacture a narrative, I want that exposed too. He paused, choosing words carefully. We don't railroad employees based on suspicion. Not at this company. The compliance chief's silence suggested he'd noted the particular emphasis. Understood, sir. We'll be thorough. Gabriel hung up, knowing he'd just drawn attention to exactly what he was trying to heed, that Karen Marquez mattered more than policy should allow. The questionnaire arrived in Karen's inbox Wednesday morning. 43 questions about her work habits, access requests, late-night activities. Each question felt designed to produce guilt regardless of innocence. Have you ever accessed files outside your project scope? Have you discussed proprietary information with anyone external to Kane International? Can you account for your whereabouts during off-hours network activity? Karen answered with timestamps, email trails, and calendar receipts that proved every login, every file access, every moment had a legitimate explanation. She submitted the responses by 5 p.m. and stayed until midnight anyway, finishing the work that wouldn't wait for investigations to clear. Jonathan Rourke found her at her desk near 10 p.m., leaning against her cubicle wall with the casual familiarity of someone who believed his position granted access to everything. Heard you're having a rough week, he said, smile sympathetic in a way that felt practiced. I could make some calls, speed up the review. HR listens when I suggest things. Karen looked up from her laptop. I appreciate the offer, but I'd prefer the investigation run its course properly. Suit yourself. Rourke's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Just remember, sometimes accepting help is smarter than proving you don't need it. He left with the particular gait of someone who just registered a slight he wouldn't forget. Thursday brought the memo, company-wide, marked important policy reminder, with conduct clause bolded and highlighted in ways that felt less like reminder and more like warning. All employees are reminded that romantic or physical relationships between staff and management are strictly prohibited. Recent events have necessitated this clarification. Recent events, as if everyone didn't know exactly who the target was. Karen ate lunch on the roof, 18 floors up, where the wind was loud enough to drown out whispers and the city was distant enough to feel like escape. She watched pigeons navigate wind currents and thought about her mother's advice. When they make you the story, stay boring. Eventually, they'll need better entertainment. That night, Gabriel sat in his office drafting emails he'd never send. Karen, you did nothing wrong. This investigation is harassment disguised as protocol. I'm fixing it. Delete. Ms. Marquez, I want you to know that I'm personally monitoring the review process to ensure fairness. Delete. I'm sorry they're doing this to you. I'm sorry my rules became weapons. I'm sorry I can't. Delete at 7:03 a.m. Friday he sent, Ms. Marquez, please forward your market analysis notes for the Lux account. Board presentation next week. GK. Her response arrived 3 minutes later. Attached. Let me know if you need supporting data. EM Professional. Perfect. Both of them hiding entire conversations in the margins of neutrality. In an office neither of them had access to, a thumb drive labeled E slid across a desk. An envelope thick with cash followed. The transaction took 8 seconds. This better be worth it, a voice said. Trust me, another replied. By next week, Gabriel Kane will be choosing between his company and his conscience. And we both know which one he'll sacrifice. The headline broke Tuesday morning. Competitor launches revolutionary skincare line, strikingly similar to Kane International's unreleased concept. By 9 a.m., the board was demanding answers. By 10, 8 forensics had flagged the source. Two midnight file exports from Karen Marquez's credentials, uploaded to an external server 48 hours before the competitor's announcement. Security escorted her from her desk at 10:47 a.m. Karen walked through the office feeling every eye track her movement, every whisper follow her path, every colleague she'd worked beside suddenly finding their screens fascinating. The interrogation room was sterile. Conference table, recording equipment, three faces that had already decided her guilt. Miss Marquez, can you explain why your credentials were used to access and export proprietary R&D files at 2:14 a.m. last Thursday? I wasn't at my computer at 2:14 a.m. I was home, asleep. Can you prove that? Can you prove I wasn't? Karen kept her voice steady. Someone cloned my credentials. That's the only explanation. Or you're lying. The door opened with enough force to make everyone turn. Gabriel stood in the threshold, jaw set, eyes containing the particular cold fury that made board members reconsider strategies. Treat her with dignity, he said, voice like ice. Or this interview ends now. The lead investigator, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd survived 3 corporate purges by never taking sides, smiled with careful neutrality. We're simply asking standard questions, Mr. Kane. Though I notice you seem quite invested in Ms. Marquez's treatment. Gabriel froze. The trap was elegant. Defend Karen and confirm suspicion. Stay silent and abandon her to false accusations. Patricia's expression said she knew exactly what she'd done. I'm invested, Gabriel said carefully, in ensuring this company doesn't railroad employees based on circumstantial digital evidence. Continue your questions, but with respect. He left before his composure could crack, knowing he'd just painted a target on both their backs. The storm hit at 6 p.m., one of those sudden electrical tempests that turned the sky purple and made the building's old infrastructure groan. Power flickered. Servers switched to generator backup. Emergency lights transformed the office into amber twilight. Karen had been released from interrogation with instructions to remain available. She found herself in the archive room, pulling old project files to prove her work patterns, when Gabriel appeared in the doorway. They stood 10 feet apart in the candlelight of emergency protocols, close enough to speak, too far to touch. They think I'm a spy, Karen said quietly. Or worse, they know I'm not, but they need someone to blame, and I'm convenient. I won't let them destroy you. You can't stop them without destroying yourself. She looked at him directly. That's the design, isn't it? Someone's making you choose. Gabriel moved closer, not touching, just closing distance that had become unbearable. My father faced a similar choice. Protect someone he cared about or protect his reputation. He chose reputation. 3 months later, when the truth came out and proved he'd sacrificed an innocent person, he couldn't live with what he'd become. You're not your friend. No, but I'm terrified of becoming him. His voice cracked slightly. Every rule I wrote, every distance I maintained, it was all designed to prevent this exact situation. And now, thunder shook the building. Their hands both reached for the same vault folder on the desk between them, fingers hovering millimeters apart. Heat without touch, both frozen by the impossibility of closing that final distance. Lightning illuminated the room in brutal white, and through the glass wall revealed a figure outside on a phone call. Jonathan Rourke, grinning like someone watching a plan unfold perfectly. He saw them seeing him, didn't stop smiling, just ended his call and disappeared into shadow. Someone wants you to look guilty, Gabriel said. Karen met his eyes. Or you to look protective. HR placed Karen on administrative leave Friday morning, effective immediately, pending completion of the investigation. The email was sterile, professional, devastating. Your building access has been suspended. Please return all company property to security. You will be contacted when the review concludes. Rumors became knives. Gossip sites picked up the story. Kane International mole, junior analyst, suspected of corporate espionage. Her inbox filled with messages from colleagues, some supportive, most performatively distant, all calculating whether association would contaminate their careers. Karen drafted her resignation on Saturday, fingers steady, words precise, effective immediately. I resigned from Kane International. Thank you for the opportunity. Her cursor hovered over send. Then she noticed something in her email cache, a fragment of a purged message that its cleanup protocol had missed. Just a subject line and partial header. Re-EM token transfer, alias JR external. She opened the raw data, found breadcrumbs, an external shell company, encrypted payments, and Jonathan Rourke's digital signature on transactions dated 2 days before her credentials were compromised. Karen grabbed her laptop and drove to Kane Tower, found Sarah Cho, the quiet genius from cybersecurity, leaving the building at 8 p.m. I need help, Karen said, and I'm either about to prove I'm innocent or confirm I'm insane. Sarah looked at the data. Her expression went from skeptical to shocked to grimly determined in 30 seconds. This is... She stopped, restarted. Give me 24 hours and coffee. A lot of coffee. Rourke cornered Gabriel in the executive garage Monday morning, smile sharp as calculation. Rough week for your protege. She's not my protege. She's an employee being investigated. Right, an employee you've defended repeatedly, publicly, enough that people are starting to ask interesting questions. Rourke leaned against Gabriel's tweo. Your rule kept you safe for a decade, Gabriel. Kept you powerful, untouchable. But the thing about rules is, once you break them, even for good reasons, they stop protecting you. I haven't broken anything. No, then explain the gala footage. Explain the late-night boardroom meetings, explain why you stormed into an HR interrogation like a man with something to lose beyond professional reputation. Rourke's smile widened. The board's going to see those security stills eventually. When they do, you'll have a choice. Admit you violated the clause you wrote, or let Karen take the fall alone. Either way, you lose. Gabriel's hands clenched. If you're behind this, behind what? An investigation into legitimate security concerns? I'm just a concerned COO watching our CEO make the same mistakes that destroyed his father. Rourke straightened. Think carefully about your next moves, Gabriel. Some falls don't leave survivors. He walked away whistling. The gossip sites posted the footage Tuesday at 9 a.m. Security camera stills from the gala, showing Gabriel and Karen in the hallway, the angle cropped to suggest intimacy, the caption reading Kane CEO's secret romance. Board members' source claims violation of company policy. Gabriel's phone exploded. Board members demanding emergency sessions, investors requesting clarification, media outlets asking for comment. He called legal at 9:14 a.m. Prepare documentation for my voluntary suspension pending investigation. If the board's going to review Karen's conduct, they review mine too. Mr. Kane, you'd be confirming the allegations just by, I know what I'm confirming. Do it anyway. Sir, if you sacrifice yourself for her, everyone will know why. The protection you're offering proves the relationship they're accusing you of. Then let it prove that. Gabriel's voice was steel. I'm not letting her fall alone for something she didn't do. Sarah Cho worked through 72 hours of encrypted data, surviving on cold brew in the particular obsession that comes from solving puzzles designed to stay unsolved. She decrypted the ledger Wednesday at 3 a.m., a complete map of Jonathan Rourke's payments, the cloned credentials, the manufactured evidence trail framing Karen, the external shell companies that bought stolen data. She started a secure compile, routing backup copies to 7 different servers, preparing documentation that would expose everything. At 3:17 a.m., the power to her entire floor died. Sarah grabbed her laptop, the only light in sudden darkness, and ran. The emergency board session convened at 2 p.m. in the same mahogany-paneled room where Gabriel's father had been voted out 15 years earlier, a fact everyone knew but no one mentioned, as if corporate memory could be managed through strategic silence. Shareholders dialed in from screens arranged like a jury box. Cameras officially off, but body language visible in every rigid posture, every careful positioning, every face that had already calculated the political cost of choosing sides. Jonathan Rourke stood at the presentation screen, wearing a suit that cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. Smile practiced to convey concern rather than triumph, voice carrying the particular gravity of someone delivering bad news they'd secretly orchestrated. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, we're facing what I can only describe as a morality meltdown at the top. He clicked to the first slide, security footage from the gala, Gabriel and Karen in the hallway, the angle expertly cropped to suggest intimacy instead of conversation. Our CEO has repeatedly violated the conduct clause he himself wrote, showing clear favoritism toward an employee now credibly accused of corporate espionage. More slides. The boardroom in amber emergency lighting. Coffee deliveries to Karen's desk with Gabriel's credit card on file. Timestamped door access showing them alone after hours. Each image innocent in context, damning in compilation. The board members shifted, some uncomfortable with the invasion, others leaning forward with the particular hunger of people who'd been waiting for leverage. Victoria Chen, the board chair who'd survived 3 regime changes by trusting data over drama, kept her expression neutral, fingers steepled, calculating. The evidence is conclusive, Rourke said. Mr. Kane has compromised his objectivity. The woman he's been protecting is the source of our largest security breach in company history. I move for immediate termination. The doors opened. Gabriel entered with palms open, shoulders back, carrying himself like a man who'd already made peace with falling. I won't contest the findings. If my actions have compromised this company's integrity, I'll step down effective immediately. No severance, no litigation, no fight. Just let this end with me. The room exhaled collectively, some relieved, others disappointed he wasn't performing the defense they'd prepared to tear apart. How noble, Rourke said, unable to fully hide his satisfaction. Though I'm afraid it won't save your protege from... The doors burst open with enough force to crack against the stops. Karen stumbled in rain-soaked, hair plastered to her face in dark streaks, mascara running, clutching a portable drive, and laptop to her chest like ammunition. I have evidence, she gasped. Complete evidence, chain of custody, financial trails, everything. Give me 5 minutes. Victoria's eyebrow raised with interest. 5 minutes, Ms. Marquez. Make them count. Sarah Cho's face appeared on the laptop screen, eyes red-rimmed from 72 hours without real sleep, surrounded by empty coffee cups in the particular chaos of someone who just solved an impossible puzzle. I've decrypted Jonathan Rourke's complete digital ledger, she said, voice hoarse but steady. He cloned Karen's credentials 3 weeks ago using a keylogger installed on her workstation during routine IT maintenance. He timed file exports to match her documented late-night work patterns, 2:14 a.m. exports while she was provably home, asleep, with building security footage showing her leaving at 8:47 p.m. Sarah pulled up screen after screen of evidence. Payment transfers to external shell companies, encrypted communications with competitors, the complete architecture of a frame-up so sophisticated it had almost worked. He sold proprietary R&D data to 3 competitors, Sarah continued, used Karen's credentials because she was vulnerable, junior employee, late-night access, and she paused, glancing at Gabriel. A connection to Mr. Kane that made her useful leverage. The board turned to Karen like a single organism sensing blood. What connection? Victoria asked, voice carefully neutral. Karen straightened, water still dripping from her clothes onto the conference room's expensive carpet. Mr. Kane repeatedly intervened during my investigation, not to obstruct, to ensure I was treated fairly. He demanded rigor without bias. He insisted on evidence over assumption. He called compliance personally to guarantee I wasn't railroaded. She paused, meeting Victoria's eyes. He never violated the conduct clause. Not physically, not romantically, but he did protect me from being destroyed by circumstantial evidence, which is exactly why Mr. Rourke chose me. To force Mr. Kane into this position, where protecting me would look like violation, and abandoning me would make him complicit in framing an innocent employee. The subtext hung in the air like smoke. Gabriel's protection proved feeling even if it hadn't crossed into policy violation. The room inhaled collectively, everyone understanding simultaneously that they were watching something more complicated than a simple scandal. Victoria looked at Rourke with the particular coldness that came before corporate executions. Security, please escort Mr. Rourke from the building. Legal, prepare documentation for criminal prosecution. IT, preserve every server, every backup, every digital footprint from his access. Rourke's smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. You're making a mistake, Victoria. Gabriel violated his own rule. Maybe not legally, but morally, emotionally. The precedent is clear. When a CEO shows this kind of favoritism, this level of personal investment, it compromises everything. You suspend him, or you admit the rules don't matter when they're inconvenient. The precedent, Victoria said coldly, is that we prosecute criminals and protect innocent employees. Remove him? Now. Security flanked Rourke. He shrugged, still performing unconcerned. I'll be out by morning. Gabriel won't. You all know it. After he was escorted out, the room sat in heavy silence. Then the board member to Victoria's left, an older man named Harrison, who'd known Gabriel's father, spoke carefully. Ms. Chen, while we appreciate Mr. Kane's intervention on behalf of Ms. Marquez, and while we're grateful for her evidence, the appearance of impropriety remains. The optics alone are exactly what Rourke designed it, Karen interrupted. He manufactured this entire scenario to force this exact conversation. Nevertheless, Harrison continued, the security footage, the repeated interventions, the documented favoritism, even if technically within policy, it creates perception problems we can't ignore. I move that we suspend the CEO pending full independent review of his conduct. The vote happened in silence, hands raised one by one, each person calculating their political survival. Unanimous. Gabriel stood slowly, removing his cufflinks with the deliberate precision of someone surrendering rank. The small platinum pieces clinked against the mahogany table, each sound like a gavel ending a trial. Thank you, Miss Marquez, he said, voice carefully controlled. You've done more than I deserve, more than I had any right to ask for. Karen watched him walk toward the door, spine straight, shoulders back, carrying himself like someone who just lost everything that mattered in title and gained everything that mattered in truth. Their eyes met once as he passed. Neither spoke. Words would have been evidence. The door closed behind him with the quiet finality of something ending that might never restart. Victoria looked at Karen, still dripping on the carpet, exhausted and triumphant, and somehow still standing. Ms. Marquez, you're reinstated effective immediately. All charges dropped. I suggest you go home, get dry, and rest. We'll discuss your future here when this settles. Karen nodded, too tired to feel relief, too wrung out to celebrate. She'd proven her innocence and destroyed the man she loved in the process. Victory tasted like ash. The paparazzi swarmed the plaza before Gabriel reached the street. Someone had tipped them. Probably Rourke's contingency plan, cameras exploding like small bombs in rain that had turned from drizzle to downpour. Questions shouted over each other became a wall of noise. Mr. Kane, did you violate your own policy? Is it true you're romantically involved with the suspect? Will you resign or fight the suspension? Karen caught him near his car, both of them instantly soaked, flashbulbs turning rain into strobing theater. You didn't have to destroy yourself for me, she said, voice breaking under the weight of everything they couldn't say publicly. Gabriel turned, and for the first time since the gala, his control cracked completely. It wasn't destruction, he said. It was the only honest thing I've done in years. The only choice that felt like living instead of just surviving policies I wrote in grief. Karen's hand moved toward his face, trembling, reaching for contact they'd denied for weeks, stopped millimeters from his cheek when she remembered the cameras, the claws his teeth. The fact that touching him now would confirm every accusation they'd spent the hearing denying. Even now, she whispered, hands suspended in the space between them, close enough to feel his warmth but separated by consequences. Even after everything, I still can't. I know. His voice was gentle, destroyed. The rule still has teeth, even when it shouldn't, even when the only thing it's protecting is the people who weaponized it. They stood in rain and camera flashes, close enough to touch, but separated by contracts that had become more real than the people they were supposed to protect. Reporters captured every second, the almost touch, the tears mixing with rain, the particular agony of two people in love being forced apart by rules neither had actually broken. Karen dropped her hand, turned, walked away before the contact she desperately wanted could become the final piece of evidence that would destroy them both. Behind her, Gabriel stood in the rain long enough for water to soak through his $1,000 suit, watching her disappear into the crowd, understanding that sometimes love looked like letting go, even when holding on felt like the only honest choice left. Inside Kane Tower, Sarah and Jerry, the security chief who'd watched this whole disaster unfold from his monitors, worked through Rourke's seized files with the methodical precision of people who understood that first evidence was rarely complete evidence. Sarah found it buried in a hidden partition at 11 p.m., a complete press kit prepared 4 days before the board meeting, pre-written headlines announcing Gabriel's suspension, prepared statements from anonymous board sources expressing deep concern about leadership failures, even a suggested timeline for announcing his permanent removal. He planned the entire arc, Sarah said, exhausted admiration in her voice despite the horror. Frame Karen. Wait for Gabriel to defend her. Leak the security footage at precisely the right moment. Trigger the board vote, every move scripted. He probably had this ready before he even started the frame-up. Jerry stared at the files, jaw tight. We need to send this to the board. Prove Rourke orchestrated Gabriel's removal, too. Won't matter. Sarah closed the laptop. The board suspended Gabriel for appearance of impropriety. This just proves Rourke manufactured the appearance. But the appearance still exists. The footage is real even if the context was designed. Gabriel still defended Karen repeatedly. The feelings are real even if the violation isn't. So Rourke wins even from custody. Rourke wins because he understood something everyone else missed. When you write rules in fear, they become weapons for people brave enough to wield them cruelly. The district attorney called Gabriel's personal cell at 6 p.m., voice carrying the particular enthusiasm of prosecutors who'd just been handed a high-profile case with solid evidence. Mr. Kane, we're moving forward with criminal charges against Jonathan Rourke. Corporate espionage, fraud, computer crimes. This is a significant case. We'll need your cooperation in Ms. Marquez's testimony. Gabriel took the call from his penthouse, surrounded by boxes he'd started packing even before the vote concluded. Use everything you need. But I want Karen's name scrubbed from the public filings. List her as Employee A or something anonymous. She's been through enough without becoming the face of this prosecution. And your name, Mr. Kane? You were a victim, too, of the frame-up, of Rourke's manipulation. Keep my name. I made choices. I'll stand behind them publicly. Gabriel looked out at the city he'd spent 15 years trying to control through policy and distance. But protect her. That's non-negotiable. Understood, sir. After hanging up, Gabriel pulled out the conduct clause, printed, highlighted, margins filled with notes from the night he'd written it 15 years ago, right after his father's funeral. He'd been 26 and terrified, convinced that preventing connection would prevent disaster. He'd been so catastrophically wrong. That night, Karen sat at her kitchen table with her own copy of the conduct clause, seeing clearly for the first time how a paragraph designed to protect it had metastasized into cage, how mandated distance had let guilty people weaponize proximity as evidence, how rules written in fear always eventually became instruments of cruelty. She pulled out her phone, typed, I wish I could hold your hand. I wish we'd met somewhere the rules couldn't touch us. I wish. She stared at the words, deleted them, typed instead, I won't let truth be the rumor this time. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. Thank you for choosing integrity over empire. I don't know what happens next, but I know you did the only honest thing possible. She sent it to Gabriel's personal number before courage could abandon her. His response came 90 seconds later. You were always braver than you knew. You walked into a boardroom and destroyed a conspiracy with evidence and truth. You saved yourself when everyone else was ready to let you burn. Rest. Tomorrow we figure out how to rebuild from honesty instead of fear. Karen cried then, not from grief but from the exhausting, overwhelming relief of surviving something designed to break her, and discovering that being broken alongside someone else somehow felt like the opposite of destruction. Outside, rain continued falling on a city that had already moved on to newer scandals, easier narratives, simpler villains. Inside, Karen slept for the first time in days, phone clutched to her chest, dreaming of ballrooms without cameras and contracts written in hope instead of fear. They had arrested Jonathan Rourke at dawn. Ausschotterbrand, federal agents, criminal charges, the kind of perp walk that made headlines and ruined legacies. Corporate espionage, fraud, computer crimes, each charge carrying years. The media that had spent weeks crucifying Karen pivoted overnight to redemption narratives. Innocent analyst, vindicated, real villain arrested in Kane International scandal. The board called emergency sessions to discuss reinstating Mr. Kane immediately with full apologies. Gabriel declined through his attorney. He'd already sold his controlling block of Kane International stock to an employee scholarship trust, structured to fund education for staff who couldn't afford advancement otherwise, managed by independent trustees, irreversible even if he changed his mind. By the time the board realized what he'd done, the paperwork was filed, the transfer complete, his majority ownership transformed into infrastructure for other people's futures. His company-wide letter arrived in every inbox at 8 a.m. Thursday. To the Kane International family. I owe you an apology that's 15 years overdue. The conduct clause I wrote after my father's death was meant to protect this company from scandal. Instead, it created a culture where fear replaced trust, where human connection became evidence of wrongdoing, where people like Karen Marquez could be weaponized simply for existing near power. I'm stepping down not because I violated the clause, though I came dangerously close in spirit, if not in letter, but because I created a system that punished humanity and rewarded distance. That was wrong. That was cowardice dressed as policy. That was my father's fear becoming my cage. The board is replacing the conduct clause with transparent, power-safe policies designed by people that's smarter and braver than me. Policies that protect vulnerable employees without criminalizing human connection. I hope you'll give them the chance I didn't earn to deserve. Thank you for 15 years. Build something better than I did. Build it with honesty instead of fear. Gabriel Kane. Karen was reinstated by noon with an official apology and all charges expunged from her record. By 2 p.m., Victoria Chen had offered her the position of head of brand development, a promotion that felt less like reward and more like the company desperately trying to prove they valued her. Karen's first act in the new role was convening a cross-level ethics council. Junior staff, middle management, executives, all given equal voice. Rules should protect vulnerable employees from those with power, she told the first meeting. They should never punish people for being human. We're rewriting everything, starting now. Gabriel packed his corner office on Friday afternoon. The space felt like a museum of a life he'd outgrown. Awards for deals that meant nothing, photos with people who'd vanished when he stopped being useful, the architecture of success that had required sacrificing everything that mattered. He kept 3 things: his father's fountain pen, tarnished and old, still carrying ink that had written the last letter before the suicide. A photo of the factory floor where he'd started at 19, before empire, before tragedy, when work had felt like purpose instead of performance. And a small jade plant Karen had given him as a joke 3 weeks ago. Something that survives neglect, she'd said, not knowing the metaphor would become prophecy. He stood at the door for a long time, boxes stacked behind him, looking at the empty space where he'd built walls disguised as achievement. His eyes were wet when he finally turned off the lights and walked away without looking back. The courier arrived at Karen's new office Monday morning. Unmarked envelope, no return address, expensive paper that felt like possibility. Inside, a handwritten note in the elegant script she'd recognize anywhere. Karen, I've rewritten the contract. Took me 3 days and 17 drafts, but I think I finally got it right. It no longer forbids what the heart allows. If you're willing to sign something new, something built on choice instead of fear, on honesty instead of protection, I'm in Venice, building something smaller and more honest, a consulting firm for companies trying to rebuild ethical cultures. Nothing impressive, just real. No pressure, no expectations, no rules except the ones we write together. Just possibility, if you want it. GK. Below the note, a plane ticket. One way, first class. Departure, Thursday evening. Karen stood at her window overlooking the city. 42 stories up, same view Gabriel had watched for 15 years, same buildings and streets and rivers of light. She pulled out her laptop, booked the flight, typed a reply to his personal email. I spent 10 years following rules written by people who were afraid. I'm tired of fear disguised as policy. Let's write something new, something brave. See you Thursday. She hit send before second thoughts could become third thoughts. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Counting the minutes. Bring comfortable shoes. Venice requires a lot of walking. And courage. Mostly courage. Karen smiled, actually smiled, the first genuine one since the gala, and started making lists of everything she'd need for a life built on choice instead of fear. Venice at blue hour, that particular time when the sky hasn't decided between day and night, when bells roll over water like prayers, when oars creak in ancient rhythm against canal, when terrace lanterns tremble on the surface like offerings to gods who've watched this city survive everything. Gabriel's new studio occupied the third floor of a building that had existed since the 1400s, surviving plagues and floods and regimes by adapting instead of resisting. Small rooms, old furniture, windows that opened to the sound of water moving against stone. Nothing impressive, just honest. Karen found him on the balcony overlooking a quiet canal, sleeves rolled, holding coffee that had gone cold, looking less like a billionaire who'd built an empire and more like someone learning, finally, painfully, hopefully, how to be human. You came, he said, not hiding his relief or his fear or the particular vulnerability of someone who'd gambled everything on a flight that might not arrive. You rewrote the contract, Karen set down her bag. Seemed rude not to read the revision. They stood apart, neither moving to close the distance yet, both understanding that some moments required letting the weight settle before touching them. I've been thinking, Gabriel said quietly, about all the rules I wrote in fear. The conduct clause, the distance, the walls disguised as policy. Every one of them was designed to prevent me from becoming my father, from loving someone, losing everything, and not surviving the aftermath. And now? Now I think my father's real mistake wasn't loving someone. It was building a life so fragile that love could shatter it. He paused. I'm trying to build something stronger, something that doesn't require sacrificing humanity to maintain structure. Karen moved to the balcony railing beside him, close but not touching, looking at water that had carried centuries of people through similar conversations. My mother lost her job because of a rumor, spent the last 15 years of her life bitter, convinced that working meant being vulnerable. She taught me to keep my head down, stay invisible, never give anyone ammunition. That's good advice. It's terrible advice. It's survival advice. And survival isn't the same as living. Karen turned to face him. I'm tired of rules written by people who were afraid. I'm tired of distance masquerading as protection. I'm tired of being polite when you want to be honest, Gabriel finished. Being professional when you want to be human. Following policies designed to prevent disaster by preventing connection. Yes, they looked at each other for a long moment, really looked without cameras or boards or clauses or consequences. Just two people who'd survived a war designed to keep them apart. Karen pulled out a single sheet of paper she'd been carrying since leaving New York. I wrote a new contract. 2 lines. Non-negotiable terms. She read in the fading light. I choose you freely, without coercion or policy or fear of consequence. I will never ask you to be smaller to make me comfortable. Gabriel took the pen from his pocket, his father's pen, still carrying old ink, added in careful script, I choose you publicly, without shame or distance or protection disguised as wisdom. I will never ask you to be braver alone. They both signed, Karen first, then Gabriel, their names on paper that meant nothing legally and everything humanly. Is that it? Karen asked. Is that the whole contract? That's the whole contract. Everything else is just, he stopped. Figuring it out together as we go, without rules, without script, just honest. Terrifying. Completely terrifying, Gabriel. I, Gabriel agreed. Karen had moved closer, not asking permission, not checking for clauses, just closing the distance they'd been forced to maintain for months. Her hand found his face, palm against his cheek, thumb brushing the corner of his mouth. I'm going to kiss you now, she said, not because policy allows it, not because contracts permit it, just because I want to. Is that okay? Gabriel's hand covered hers. That's more than okay. That's... She kissed him before he could finish. Quiet, certain, overdue. The kind of kiss that felt less like passion and more like coming home after being lost for decades. His hands found her waist, pulled her closer with the particular tenderness of someone who'd spent too long wanting and denying and surviving the space between. She melted into him, all the tension and fear and careful distance finally releasing into something that felt like the opposite of destruction. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, breathing hard, both smiling with relief so profound it hurt. Worth the wait? Karen whispered. Worth everything, Gabriel answered. Sarah Cho launched Kane International's Truth Lab, an internal investigative unit empowered to investigate ethics complaints with the same forensic precision she'd used to expose Rourke, reporting directly to the board, protected from retaliation by ironclad whistleblower policies. Within 6 months, she'd exposed 3 more cases of systematic harassment, recovered millions in fraudulent expenses, and earned a reputation as the person you called when truth mattered more than politics. Jerry mentored at-risk youth through a foundation Gabriel's trust funded, teaching them that survival sometimes looked like knowing when to fight and when to preserve yourself, when to speak and when to document, when to trust the system and when to build new systems that deserve trust. Gabriel's Scholarship Trust funded 17 employee startups in the first year, turning the empire he'd built from grief and control into infrastructure for other people's brave beginnings. He consulted remotely from Venice, helping companies rebuild ethical cultures after scandals, teaching them what he'd learned too late, that rules, while written in fear, always became weapons eventually. Karen rebranded Kane International around humane ambition, the radical idea that profit didn't require sacrificing people, that success could be measured in employee well-being as much as shareholder returns, that companies could be both profitable and kind. The rebrand won awards. More importantly, it reduced turnover by 40% and increased productivity by metrics no one had predicted. A year later, they returned to Kane International's annual gala. Same ballroom, same chandeliers catching light like captured stars, same string quartet playing the same elegant, meaningless soundtrack. But different rules, different contract, different people walking through doors that used to feel like traps. Karen wore a dress that caught light without trying, emerald green, simple, honest. Gabriel wore a tuxedo that fit but didn't define him. They arrived together, no pretense of professional distance, Karen's hand resting in the crook of Gabriel's arm where everyone could see. The room noticed. Of course the room noticed. But this time the attention felt less like judgment and more like acknowledgement. 2 people who'd survived a system designed to break them, rewriting that system from outside its walls. A junior analyst, nervous, maybe 23, wearing a suit that looked like it came from a thrift store, approached with the particular courage of someone who'd decided being brave mattered more than being comfortable. Mr. Kane? Ms. Marquez? I just wanted to say, she paused, gathering words. The new ethics policies, the Truth Lab, the protection for reporting harassment, it made me feel safe bringing forward a complaint that I would have just lived with before. My supervisor was, it doesn't matter what he was doing. It matters that Sarah investigated, and he's gone now, thank you. Karen smiled genuinely. Thanks, Sarah, and thank yourself for being brave enough to speak. The system only works when people trust it enough to use it. But you built the system, the analyst said. You changed the rules. We didn't build it, Gabriel corrected gently. We just removed the rules that prevented people from being human. The system you're describing, people protecting each other, telling truth, trusting that honesty will be valued. That's not policy. That's people choosing courage. That's all of you. The analyst left looking taller than as she'd arrived. As the evening progressed, Gabriel and Karen moved through the room together, not performing distance, not hiding connection, not pretending that love was unprofessional or connection was liability. They simply existed as two people who'd learned the hard way that rules designed to prevent disaster usually just postponed honesty. Near midnight, they found themselves on the same terrace where Karen had once eaten lunch alone to avoid whispers. "Regret anything?" she asked, leaning against the railing, city lights sprawling below like evidence of lives being lived beyond policy. Only that it took so long to realize the rules were the problem, not the solution. Gabriel stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Simple contact that had once been forbidden, now just ordinary intimacy. "But I think we had to break completely before we could rebuild honestly." "Think we'll go back?" Karen asked. "To New York? To the company?" "Do you want to?" "I want," she paused, choosing words carefully. "I want to build things. Help people rebuild after systems fail them. Create something that doesn't require sacrificing humanity to maintain structure. Whether that's here or New York or anywhere, doesn't matter, as long as it's honest." Gabriel pulled her close, kissed her forehead with the casual affection of people who'd earned the right to simple tenderness. "Then let's build that, wherever it takes us." Behind them, the gala continued, new employees signing new contracts that trusted them to be human without demanding they stop being people first. Namas. The chandeliers cast the same light they'd cast for decades, but the shadows were different now. Softer, more honest, more room for people to exist in complexity instead of reducing themselves to policy compliance. Karen leaned into Gabriel, his arm around her waist, both of them looking at a city that had witnessed their breaking and rebuilding, and understood. He wrote the rules to protect an empire, then he rewrote them to protect a heart, and finally learned the empire was never the point. The point was this: standing on a terrace with someone who'd chosen you when choosing was complicated, who'd been brave when bravery cost everything, who'd learned alongside you that love wasn't the liability that destroyed empires. Love was the only thing that made empires worth building in the first place.